Hello, hello. Thank you all for joining us today. We're super excited to have you here. Before we jump into today's content, just a few short housekeeping notes I wanted to share with you all. First of all, this presentation will be recorded. We want you to stay fully engaged in today's session. You don't have to worry about taking a bunch of notes or if you missed something. In the email after today's session, you will receive a link that will provide the on-demand version of this presentation. So you can watch it as many times as you'd like and make sure you didn't miss any of the amazing insights you're about to hear today. On that topic of staying engaged with us, we want to hear all of the questions that come top of mind for you. If you look at the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a questions icon. Go ahead and click there, and that is where you'll submit all of your questions and submit them throughout today's session. And towards the end, we have baked in a little bit of time to get through as many as possible answered live by today's speakers. Lastly, we create these webinars, we create all this content for you all. So it would mean the world to us if you have 60 more seconds to spare to fill out our post-event survey. And I promise you when I say we actually read them, we take all of that feedback that you all share and we keep it in mind as we continue to build content and webinars for you all. All right, without any further ado, let's kick off today's session. The Pulse of Work in 2025, Trends, Truths, and the Practicality of AI. And I'm super excited to bring to stage with me today's presenters. Joining me on camera here shortly, we have our very own Neha Merchandani, our Vice President of Corporate Marketing here at GoTo. We are super excited to have on stage with us Dan Schaubel, Managing Partner at Workplace Intelligence, and another GoTo very own Paulo Tomas, our Senior Director, Digital Support Transformation. Welcome, everybody, and we are super excited to have you here today. Without any further ado, I will go ahead and pass it over to you, Neha, and enjoy today's session, everybody.
Thank you, Danny. That was a energetic start. I love that. And thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to share the findings from our recent Pulse of Work survey. And Dan is going to be my partner on this. We'll first cover the methodology and share, who we surveyed, the topic areas, etc., and then dive into some of the meat of the results. This is going to be followed by a discussion with a real-life IT professional, Paulo Tomas, who you just met. He will share his perspectives and experience with AI in the workplace. And finally, as Danny said, we hope to have some time to answer any top-of-mind questions that you might have. So be sure to get those in as soon as they pop into your brains. With that, let me share some context on the methodology first. We surveyed 2,500 global workers, and this was an even split between employees as well as IT decision makers. And this was across various sizes of companies, from small, mid-size, and large enterprises across 10 different countries around the world. And you can see the countries listed here at the bottom of the slide. The survey was conducted very recently between February and April of this year. And this was done in partnership with Dan's organization, Workplace Intelligence, which is a leading market research firm. Now, I don't want to steal Dan's thunder here, but I'm sure it's not going to be a huge surprise to you guys, but the survey was focused on AI. Well, what else could it be on? And by the way, fun fact, yesterday was AI Appreciation Day. Dan, did you know that? So
Of course.
super timely. Yeah,
Every day seems like it's AI
I
Appreciation
know.
Day.
I know. So kind of timely, right, that we're talking about this.
Absolutely. And of course, as everyone knows, AI has, basically taken over the business world across every department, everything. So, very, very important business topic. And there's so many aspects of it, but the survey we worked on with GoTo covered a lot. I mean, from the state of AI, which is really exploring the current landscape of AI adoption within our companies, as well as the hype versus the practical use of AI, which I think is really important because, of course, AI is, a buzzword, even though it's also a technology that's being used effectively or ineffectively, truthfully. And so we examined the gap between the hype and the actual use cases from a day-to-day perspective, and how employees are deploying it within their organizations. And then AI misuse, we went really into how employees are misusing some of the tools, especially on very sensitive tasks. I think that's really important because obviously there's can be security issues, privacy issues, and a whole host of other problems, especially with people breaking their AI policies, which we're going to get to as well. And then the AI adoption gap. Obviously, we know that organizations are at least talking, and many are adopting AI, but there's a lot of disconnects between how familiar people are with it, because it's more than just saying AI or Gen AI or Agentic AI. And it's more about the confidence that employees and IT decision makers and leaders have when it comes to using the tools and equipping their workforces. And then also we focus, like I was saying before, on the AI policies and the training more and more, not even just, this study, other studies and everything I've read and people I've talked to in this space, there's the training is just not there, right? So it's use AI, but we're not going to, provide the tools and guidance on, how to properly use it. So you're getting the most out of it to increase your efficiencies and make you a better worker, more effective. So we talk about the policies in terms of, organizations that have it versus don't have it, importance of having those policies, as well as the training that's involved. And then finally, of course, the AI implementation and ROI. I mean, that to me is very important, because you can use it, but you gotta, like everything else in business, you have to measure, how effective it is, and have different use cases so that you can have return and then continue that investment in AI. We're going to go to a poll before we share some of the key takeaways and findings. Based on what I was saying, in terms of one of the things we're covering is AI overhyped? Like, let us know what you think, from your experience, and then we'll share what we
And
found in the study.
yeah, I'm really curious, Dan, what the attendees here are going to say around hype versus not compared to our survey data. Any guesses?
Absolutely.
You wanna guess?
I have the data in front of me, so I'm not going to guess like that. But I will say that heading into this project, it was certainly top of mind, to really understand, because everyone hears about AI, but like what's actually happening within
Mhm.
organizations. So that's kind of one of the things that inspired the study in the first place, and that's why we're leading with it here. So about half of people have
Yeah.
voted so far. We're getting there.
Yeah, and the one point I do want to make, Dan, is our audience today is likely very heavily IT
Yeah.
leaders. The data that we see here in comparison, so we've got two data points, right, in our study. One is on the employee side and the other on IT. So we should be sure to compare apples to apples in some cases here, right?
Yes, and I do think that skews the data here. But also, yeah, it's reflective in terms of what we see, which I'll reveal in just a minute. We're at 65. Okay, we just ended the poll, and the result was 32% said yes versus the 68% that says no, it's not overhyped. And just if you look at our data, we found that 62% of employees say that AI is significantly overhyped versus the 49% of IT leaders. So, this is, people who joined today, certainly, are a self-selected group of people who are on the AI train and are very familiar with AI and have probably implemented it or attempted to within their organization. So I think that for sure can skew the data. We see a lot of times with these type of events, like, you're self-selecting the types of people who are already pretty knowledgeable about this stuff. So that's great. I mean, that's really good news. You're clearly on the cusp and the cutting edge here. And so more on the data and some of the key takeaways that we want to discuss with you is 62% of employees think AI is significantly overhyped, like I was saying, yet 86% say they aren't fully using AI to its potential, right? So it's overhyped, but at the same time, if they're able to use it better, then the hype can kind of fade away, right, into the background, because it becomes not really as much part of the conversation anymore. And then another contributing factor, which I think is important, is familiarity. 82% of employees admit they aren't very familiar with the practical use of AI in their daily work. They hear that AI is important. They're excited about it. There's a lot of demand, from management and maybe IT and various, leaders at the organization. But then when it comes to the day to day, it's like, okay, what do I use it and what do I use it for? What are the actual use cases? And again, this whole idea of practical AI is one of the big focuses on this whole study of why we entered into the partnership and wanted to reveal new findings on this topic. And then really we try to calculate the efficiency gains, because when it comes to AI and the ROI of it, it comes to cutting down on costs, cutting down on time spent doing more, let's say, administrative work, and then the overall economic impact, which we found is significant. U.S. businesses could be missing out on over 2.9 trillion in annual efficiency gains, and this is really built on the whole idea that people could be saving 13 hours a week. So instead of spending those 13 hours doing work that you really don't need to do, AI could be handling that for you, making you more efficient, so you could do potentially more high impact work that can help with the bottom line, and that can really drive productivity too. Because a lot of this administrative work, whether people admit it or not, holds you back because you don't even like doing it. So it's time to admit that some of these things we shouldn't be doing anymore.
I need an AI assistant for sure. I would say I would welcome that. Um, so one of the things I just want to highlight here is, I'm assuming that the bulk of the attendees here are IT leaders. I would encourage you to think about, as we're going through this data, we're sharing employee data as well as IT data in both cases. In some cases, it's kind of important to know how your employees are dealing with or not dealing with AI, right? And what does that mean from an IT best practices perspective as you're thinking about the tools and technologies that you're bringing into your organization? So now, as Dan talked about, it's a pretty staggering number, the 2.9 trillion number. That's for U.S. businesses alone, as he shared. And he's talked so far about the usage of AI or lack thereof. But on the other side of the coin, AI is being misused in many cases. And that's a really interesting finding coming out of our study, Dan, that 54% of employees admit that they're using AI for tasks that they should not be using them for high stakes, sensitive things like work requiring emotional intelligence, tasks that impact safety, legal, or compliance, and HR, people related sensitive information or personnel action. So clearly, you should not be using AI for that. Now, yet over 75% of them don't regret doing this. Now, this raises the question around AI policies and training. And it's really important that companies need to be more purposeful about AI implementation overall. And our research found that less than 50% of companies today have an AI policy in place. While both employees and IT believe that their companies need to offer better training and guardrails around AI usage, and that they would welcome that. Now, there's no doubt, as we all know, that AI has a lot of value to offer, and companies can start pretty small by spending just $20 or less a month per employee per month. It would save each employee an estimated 1 hour a day. Yet most IT leaders say that, they're faced with challenges in justifying the spend around AI, which, as Dan mentioned earlier, brings us to the topic of ROI, which is really important. And we're going to dig into that a little bit later as well. And, interestingly, on ROI, 50% of IT says that their company isn't really measuring the ROI of AI very well, which of course could be hindering this challenge with AI investment. So those are just some of the key summary of findings. We're going to dive into some of the deeper data now. Now, as Dan sort of teed up, usage of AI overall is actually pretty high. So if you look at the data on the left-hand side of the slide here, 78% of employees say that they are, in fact, actually using AI. So, what are they using? They're using everything from free solutions like ChatGPT to specialized internal tools that are either company purchased or developed, or in many cases, employee purchased. Yet 62% of employees say that they think AI is significantly overhyped. So, Dan, it might be helpful if we could share with folks here how we defined overhyped when we asked that question in the survey.
Yeah, so for that question, Neha, we gave four different options because AI could be overhyped in many different ways. And these are the most common ones that we hear in the marketplace. AI being falsely portrayed as a solution to every business problem, which it's not. AI falsely being portrayed as providing more value and ROI than it actually does. And like Neha was mentioning, a lot of companies aren't even measuring ROI right now or not doing it appropriately. AI taking over everyone's job. And yes, there has been some automation of jobs. We can't ignore that, but it's not as much as everyone makes it out to seem. And then AI being error free and always better than humans. And anyone who's used AI knows that you can use it and then you got to look it over maybe just to make sure that maybe if it's in your voice or may miss something or maybe it cites an article that could be out of date or there's all these things that could come up. So I think it's really important to recognize that the overhype comes from somewhere. It's not just we're not just saying it. There's different ways in which people perceive it being overhyped.
Yeah, I mean, and the stat being pretty high here, it's a real thing, right? I mean, and to your point, people think about overhype in different ways, but it is real. Now, switching gears, IT leaders are a bit more optimistic, with nearly 50% believing that AI has been significantly overhyped. So the number for IT is lower, not surprising, because IT has obviously a stronger grasp on AI technology in general. Now, companies also have some concerns around AI. The key barriers to AI adoption, according to IT leaders, are what you see on this slide. The top three being security concerns, no surprises there. Lack of employee trust and buy-in, as well as tools not being tailored for specific industry needs. So there's a lot of conversation around this in the industry as well. So it's not just blanket AI tools, right? And everybody wants very specific tailored solutions for their role, for their function, for their industry. So that is definitely top of mind. But overall, our data shows that people actually don't fully understand how to use AI. And that might be leading to some of these concerns about overhype, as well as why people are misusing AI just because they don't know how to fully use it. So, you want to dive into that a little bit, Dan?
Yeah, so of course we talk about AI being overhyped, but really it's being overlooked. And I think that's really important to recognize is that, you can look past the hype and we really need to figure out how to practically use it. And 86% of workers are not fully utilizing AI to its full potential, like I had said previously. And I think, aside from the amount of hours it can save you on a daily and a weekly and a monthly and a yearly basis, all this adds up. And so as Neha had mentioned in a previous slide, it's like, to pay $20 a month for something that could save hours a day, hours a week, et cetera, that all adds up. And that is, in a sense, some ROI right there when you really do that calculation. Um, we looked at this from a generational perspective. I mean, we do a lot on generations just because it's really fascinating to see in terms of adoption and viewpoints. And what we found is, yeah, you would assume that this chart would be the reverse, right, Neha?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I took a double take when we looked at the data initially, Dan, because I was like, really? Gen Z still thinks that? So it was definitely surprising data.
Absolutely. And I think over time this will change though, because with everyone using it, on an individual basis and collaboratively. Eventually, everyone will kind of get up to speed and be using it, regularly. I see that definitely happening. And once you start to realize that the cost savings and how that adds up, and how it doesn't matter. The thing with AI is it doesn't matter what your age is, what your gender is. Like, it doesn't care about all that. Like, anyone can
Right,
use it, and I think that
right.
that's a really important message. And also the high cost of AI underuse, not using it to its full potential is very high, 2.9 trillion a year in efficiency gains if you could use it and maximize it to its full potential, like I said before. And despite this underuse, employees are recognizing the benefits of AI. We
I think
found
you're on
that
the next, sorry to interrupt, Dan. I think you're on the
yes,
next slide, right? Danny, you might want to advance to the next.
correct. Yeah, and so when people think about AI and the ROI of it and why people are using it and why businesses are championing AI, the first thing that comes to mind for sure is productivity. I mean, that
Mhm.
is, I would say, AI and productivity from a use case, from what people are talking about in business today is number one. There's not even a question, and it showed up in our data just like that. But what I thought was really interesting is there's so many aspects of AI that might be overlooked, kind of playing into this theme here. The fact that AI can really help with better customer support, more efficient customer support that can really scale to meet the demands of people who need it within the organization, or actual customers. And then motivation and engagement, really, because if AI can make people more efficient and more excited about their job because it's getting rid of more of the administrative work, allows them to kind of focus on the most important tasks at hand. That's really important. And then the collaboration part, like I was mentioning with generations, is I think the collaboration number will go up year over year as people see it as not something that's more isolated for an individual, but more collaborative. I think that will be a big, big transition. That's exciting. But all these percentages are pretty high. What do you think, Neha?
Yeah.
Was this surprising to you?
Yeah. No, I'm actually not surprised because, I was just thinking as you were going through this slide, Dan, that there is not a single industry or a single job role or a functional area that is not impacted or is going to be impacted by AI, right? Which is why it's like nobody can ignore this. It's get on the bandwagon, figure out how and what this is going to enable you to do from all of these different areas because that's where the world is going, right? And what does that mean for
Yeah,
you?
and it honestly reminds me of the work we've done so much in well-being at work, and it's like, mental health doesn't, it doesn't care if you're 16 or 60 years old. Like, and it's the same with AI. It's like you're going to use it regardless of who you are, your position. CEOs are using it. Like, so it
Yeah.
has. That's why it's such a universal and important topic to wrap your heads around, because no matter who, you hundreds of people who are listening right now, especially you because you're in IT, or many of you are in IT. This is part of your job, whether you like it or not. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree, Dan. And I think that, that going back to that $2.9 trillion number, so this is a really important data point because if this doesn't motivate companies to better understand why employees are not using AI to its full potential, then I don't know what would, right? So if you go to the next slide, 82%, we touched on this a little bit earlier. 82% of employees admit that they aren't very familiar with the practical applications of AI in their day to day work, right? Which was what I had referenced earlier. You have to think about what does AI mean to you in your role, in your function, in your day to day jobs. And this was a little bit surprising. Once again, this is another data cut, Dan, that we did around generations. And this was another surprising thing to me was that the most tech savvy Gen Z workers also have knowledge gaps, with 74% saying that. And, the number just goes upwards from there as you think about the generations. And I think, Dan, I was telling you the story about my son. I have a Gen Z son who's a software engineer, And just the other day, he was telling me how he had to spend a lot of time cleaning up one of his coworkers' code that she had written actually using AI. And he was like, oh gosh, I had to clean it up, and it was sloppy work and all of that. And that just sort of underscores, to me at least, the importance of training employees on AI, on how to use it in the right way. And I guess us humans still have a role to play in that mix, because we need to review, refine AI's output, right? We're not where AI does something and then boom, ship it, right? We're kind of not quite there yet.
Yeah, and
So,
you're so detail oriented that for an AI to be an AI Niha would be a big challenge, that's for sure.
oh my gosh, you know me well, Dan. So interestingly, on the IT leaders side, less than half of IT leaders think that employees aren't very familiar. So there's a bit of a disconnect here. So the other thing that I want to touch on, if we head to the next slide, there's another gap, and this is a trust gap. 86% of employees actually doubt AI's accuracy, compared to 53% of IT leaders thinking that. IT says that they regularly spot errors, and that AI output often requires refinement. Just the story that I just shared with you guys, about my software engineer son. On the other side, there's another interesting finding, which is not hugely surprising, I think, Dan, is that small businesses are the most challenged when it comes to AI usage. What we're showing here is organizations with 50 workers or less. Only 59% of employees there say that they use AI today, compared to, if you look at larger organizations, which are at 80%, right?
I know it's so
Um,
surprising, don't you think? Because you have fewer resources, so you'd think you'd lean on
I
AI
know.
more to have an advantage.
But this comes back to like training and some of that, right? Which you get more of, I think, at larger organizations, maybe more than, it's more kind of when you're at a startup or a smaller company, it's like do it yourself. You have to figure it out. And yes,
And you've
you need
worked
to
at a
be
small
motivated.
company, so you can compare and contrast. But yeah, it's so interesting. It's like
Yeah,
small business is such an advantage. You have fewer resources, so you assume that you can do more with fewer resources by using AI. But at the same time, you lack the resources to better equip yourself to then unlock AI's full potential.
exactly, exactly. So that was the other point, and that I was going to reference on this slide, which is nearly half of employees at smaller companies feel like they lack the know-how on how to use AI, right? To save the time, to improve their work, versus roughly 30% at larger organization. So, Dan, so far we've talked about usage stats, and I think there's some interesting stats around misuse that I'd love for you to share with everyone.
Absolutely. So one of the areas that I mentioned, at the beginning of the presentation was on misuse and policy enforcement. And these are really, really important topics because it helps with adoption and people using it in the right way and avoid using it in the wrong way, right? And so what we
Mhm.
found is that 25% of employees were aware that their employer explicitly prohibits their use of AI for certain tasks, such as these tasks like, using emotional intelligence, or where emotional intelligence would be better used. Tasks that, when it comes to safety, I think safety is actually like very, it's a huge deal. I mean, if you think about AI use in like warehouses and physical environments, I mean, the amount of safety by using AI versus in robotics rather than,
Mhm.
someone getting injured on the job is so significant. So I think that's a big topic. Legal and compliance is another topic that's really important. Strategic decisions, making better decisions. A lot of people use AI as a brainstorm partner, but you got to be smart about that too, because at the end of the day, people aren't going to sue AI. They're going to sue the organization. They'll sue the CEO and or employee or whatnot. So I think that's really important to know. And for all these employees that are, aware of their employer prohibiting AI use in these ways, they they just don't care. 77% of the employees say they don't regret using AI in this way. And that's a big problem, right? And so I think a lot of this comes down to, you gotta, coach and train and make sure people are aware of the drawbacks and the harm it could do to them from a professional and personal standpoint, as well as the organization. That's that type of communication, and then setting that setting those precedents, setting those ground rules is really important. And by the way, obviously it can evolve, but once you do it once, and once you have a really good policy that's available, and you know in internal websites, and however you communicate it through newsletters, etc., like that's how you build a culture around AI use versus the misuse.
Yeah, I mean, I found this data really fascinating, Dan, because on one side we've got the usage data and then we've got the misuse data. And they're not using it enough, and when they are using it, they're in many cases they're not using it in the right ways, and to your point, it can do harm if not used in the right ways, right? So definitely an area for companies to focus on. So switching gears, actually, this brings us to the point around adoption, and how should companies be thinking about adoption of AI. And, is there a gap in adoption between, for example, the types of solutions that companies are offering versus what employees are actually looking for? So our data showed that only 4 out of 10 employees say that their companies offer the tools that they need and they want. So what exactly are employees looking for? So here's what the data showed us. They're asking for AI virtual assistants to do things like set reminders, manage calendars. They're looking for AI automation tools for data entry, email management, and more. They want AI communications tools for things like real-time translation, transcription, Gen AI tools to write content and code, and the AI chat assistants to communicate with customers. So these were some of the top things that employees highlighted that they're looking for from an AI tools perspective. Now, it's not just employees that want the right AI tools. IT is also looking for practical AI tools. 95% say of IT leaders say that they value AI that analyzes device, network, and support ticket data for troubleshooting. And 96% say that AI for security monitoring and data protection compliance is essential to their jobs. Now, there's some similarities in the data between employees and IT, but Dan, the other interesting thing that we saw was there are also some pretty substantial disconnects between IT and employees, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a big AI divide. And I mean, this is a running theme through all the data we're sharing, right? Clearly, like there's a disconnect, and it can create friction, but it's also, I think, important to note that IT leaders are also very close to this technology, much closer from a technical standpoint than employees. So that perspective, uh, could be slightly different and unique in that way. So I'm just going to go through the four main disconnects. The first one is IT leaders overestimating AI usage. 86% of employees admit they're not using AI tools to their full potential, but 58% of IT believe that employees at their company are underutilizing AI. So there's a pretty big gap there. The second disconnect is IT leaders think employees are more familiar with AI than they actually are. 82% of employees say they aren't very familiar with AI's practical applications in their daily work versus the 49% of IT leaders that believe their employees lack this level of understanding. The third disconnect is the clash between confidence in AI's reliability. 86% of employees are not confident in the accuracy and reliability of AI tools versus the even lower 53% of IT leaders who hold the same level of lack of confidence. And it highlights just a major trust gap that Neha had talked about earlier too. And once you can overcome the trust gap and close the gap, really, that will lead to broader adoption. And then finally, the fourth disconnect is the training gap persists. I'm going to be talking about this more as well. 87% of employees feel most workers aren't being trained properly in the practical use of AI, and this relates to what we were just talking about, the use versus misuse, proper use versus misuse, and indicated a perceived lack of effective training when you have this high of a number. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
massive number of people are just not receiving that level of support. Yet the 59% of IT leaders share that view, pointing that there's a major awareness gap here in the extent of training that's required from management.
Thanks, Dan. I really do think that there's an opportunity to bridge that divide, and hopefully the data that Dan and I just walked through is helpful in that endeavor. Now, we'd like to switch the conversation to some practical insights, and what does this data really mean, and how can you action this when you walk out of this webinar? And to help us do that, I want to invite Paolo to join us now. A little bit of quick context on Paolo. Paolo has been overseeing technology implementations for over 17 years now. He's currently GoTo Senior Director of Digital Support Transformation, where he focuses on our digital workplace functions, which include IT, HR, as well as finance systems. Now, Dan and I just talked about bridging the adoption gap for AI. And a key element of this is cost, which, as we discussed, can be a big inhibitor. Now, the data that we shared earlier that I want to underscore again shows that 77% of IT leaders struggle to justify investments in AI. Now, the good news, as we talked about earlier, is that the cost is not that big. Just spending an extra $20 or less on AI tools per month per employee could save each employee 1 hour in greater efficiency. So I'm really curious, Paolo, as to your thoughts on the data and what has your personal experience been when you kind of talk to your peers in the industry in justifying AI spend?
Yeah, thanks, Neha. Thanks, Dan. So I just want to say like the focus should be on very small incremental spend into existing tools to gain a lot of the efficiency instead of trying to get into very large scale implementations. So the focus of that is you want to really identify the problem, identify where the bottlenecks may be, and you may already have a solution in your existing technology, tech stack, whatever implementations you may have with just, as Neha, as you mentioned, a very small $20 per month spend that can then solve those problems. So I think it's about understanding what you have today, but really understanding what problem you're trying to solve, and then go about solving it in a very quick, meaningful manner, as opposed to look for large, scale solutions to implement.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point that you just made, Paolo, because sometimes, it's about not AI for AI's sake, but being very targeted, right? Like where you think AI within your organization can really add value, whether it's automating, increasing efficiencies, right? Like things like that. So, and then when you, to your point, look at what you already have and see how you can leverage that and where you can fine tune and refine. So I think that's really great advice there. So I want to now switch to the topic that ties to this, which is measuring the ROI of AI, right? Which is top of mind, I know, for IT leaders. So how are folks measuring this? So the data that you see here on the slide shows that 49% of IT leaders say that their company isn't actually doing a great job of measuring the ROI of AI tools, a figure that rises to 64% when you look at smaller companies. Now, what you see to the right here are some current ways that companies track the ROI of AI. Any thoughts on these metrics and guidance you might have, Paolo, for folks on how to best measure the ROI of AI?
Yeah, so I think you have to go back before you start measuring the ROI of AI. You want to understand what is the effectiveness of the current technology and processes that you have. Create a baseline. Then you can begin to differentiate all the changes that you started to go through, including AI or any other changes, to then start measuring what is the effectiveness, i.e., or the ROI that you're getting. And if it's working, great. If it's not working, okay, you've identified that it doesn't work and you're able to go back to where you were, knowing that you've now have a baseline established to go forward.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point because if you don't have a baseline, what are you measuring it against, right? So that makes a lot of sense. Now, before we dive into the next practical step, fun little quick poll for you, for all of you. Does your company currently have an AI policy in place? So, you have three options here. Yes, we have a policy in place. No, but we're currently working on one or plan to, or no, and we have no plans to create one. Um, Dan, Paolo, thoughts on where we think we're going to land here? And by the way, Paolo, you and I were talking about this earlier. How should people think about an AI policy, right? Like, any thoughts there while people are taking the poll?
I think we have to look at a policy as overall, not a policy, a governance. Treat it as any other technology and see what it needs to go going forward. I do believe we're going to land probably closer to the nose, only because just based on the survey results, a lot of leaders have went into technology, but not so much guidance from the employees. That's my thought,
Paula,
just based on the
do
survey.
you, Paula, do you think that like an AI policy is its own separate thing, or is it built as part of a larger kind of IT technology policy?
It should be part section as part of an overall accepted user policy. So this way you can have it the same way that you have a social media policy, you can then have an AI policy, but it shouldn't be its own separate because that will just confuse your employees because one could supersede the other. So make it part of it. This way it's an encompassing on the best practices for any kind of tools, whether it's hardware or software.
Another question I have is, so there was a whole movement for years about bring your own device. Do you remember like when
Mhm.
BlackBerry and RIM were like the
Mhm.
biggest thing and everyone had to use one?
Don't date yourself, Dan. Don't date yourself.
Ah, wow. And then there was a whole bring your device. Like people were like, I just want to bring my iPhone or whatnot in work and use that. I don't want to use this BlackBerry, for instance. Do you think that there's something about the tools with AI too? It's like I like ChatGPT or some other tool. Like my company's using one tool, but I just kind of want to use my own. Do you see any sort of clash when it comes to the technology use in the workplace versus outside the workplace?
Well, oddly enough, I don't think the underlying technology is the same. There's only so many providers that are building these models out there. Obviously, there's a lot of startups, well-funded, not well-funded, however you want to call it. So what changes is how they've tailored those models from a UI perspective and for the user. So if you really want somebody to be able to use it in a workplace, then you should tailor for the workplace based on the governance and based on the tasks that they want to do. But if somebody really wants to use because I think it's just better in the marketplace, okay, don't try to change it. Understand why is this tool better, and then provide the feedback, whether it's buy versus build, of how you arrive there, and make your tool to fit your employees. So I think the having the feedback is the best part. If you didn't have the feedback, that means that people didn't care enough to share it with you. And so I think you should listen in and lean
Yeah,
into it.
great point. And so let's look. We have a lot of votes came in. 17% say they have an AI policy in place. That is like minuscule compared to, we found that 45% of IT leaders said that they have one in place. And so that's much less than I would have expected, especially in
Mhm.
2025.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. But you also have a lot of people, 41% are currently working and plan to. So hey, we do this next year, and you're going to get a much higher percentage that convert from the 41 to the 17, and then also the no plans that can also change too, right?
Mhm.
A
Yep.
lot of things can change between now and even the next several months, truthfully. So very interesting. From an AI policy perspective, almost a third of employees have violated those policies. So clearly, we need better policies, but we also need the training and the communication and kind of setting expectations too when it comes, concerning those policies
Let's
because
go to, let's, yep, switch to the slide that you're speaking to. I think, Dan, I want to make sure people get to see the data. Yep, perfect. Thank
excellent.
you.
Yeah. So as you can see, 45% of the IT leaders report they have an AI policy in place, but even with them in place, 30% are violating those policies. So we got to stop violating these policies. We got to take them much more seriously, right, Nia?
Yes, for sure.
Paulo, question. So why do you think that all these employees are violating these policies? Is it the policy's not good? Is it training? Like, where's the disconnect there? Because
Well,
kind of
yeah, I think the
staggering
survey,
to even know that.
yeah, the survey both here that we took and the survey we just took just on this session alone
Hmm.
speaks to it. It's the fact that, there probably is a policy, but there it may not be communicated or effectively disseminated as much as it should be amongst all the employees, right? So it's kind of creating this gray area to say, well, I'm a leader, I clearly have a policy, here's the policy. And then if you ask the employees, do you have a policy? No, I don't think so. I just use whatever I want. Oops, I've just violated it. So I think it's important to not leave our employees confused and say, here's the policy, or no, we don't have one because we don't want you to use
Yeah.
it. There's nothing wrong with that. Depending on your industry, you may not be able to use these tools and who your customers are or so on, but be clear about that. And then that is the policy. So I think it's about whether you have one or not, making sure it's communicated and get rid of the gray areas that exist out there.
I think you really hit on a couple of really interesting points there, Paolo, because if you're a smaller organization, the word policy can seem like big, daunting, right? Like I've got to like
Yeah.
codify things and what you just said is it can be a couple of simple things, right? They're guardrails, they're giving guidance to employees on what they can and can't do. Even if it's a simple thing, you do have to write it down and you do have to share it with your employees so they know what it is and you train them on it, right? So one doesn't have to overthink, maybe depending on the size of company that you are, what goes into the policy. Would you agree with that, Paolo?
Absolutely. It's important is get get rid of the confusion, get rid of the area. If you don't want people to use it, just say I don't want people to use it. But if you don't communicate that effectively or even even communicate at all, then employees are going to use it because it's like, well, I'm going to use it because I use it at home. I'm going to use it at work too. It works for me.
Yeah, yeah. That brings us to training, right, Dan?
Training. Yeah. Something we've definitely harped on multiple times so far. And, you know, it's not even just our survey. I was reading another survey this morning where there was, people talking about a lack of training when it comes to AI. And we found that employees think the AI tools need better instructions and better guardrails. That connects to what we were just saying about having a policy in place. Training and policies are like, they go hand in hand, right?
Right.
uh, Having the policy and then training on the policy and the execution is very important. And IT leaders agree with the sentiment, but not as much as employees. Again, this stark contrast between the IT leaders as well as the employees that flows through all the research that we did. And companies must provide better AI training. That people can effectively use these tools, understand what they're best used for, what to avoid, like we were saying before, to maximize productivity gains, to increase the efficiencies and avoid risks and any emotional costs really that can come along with it. Paulo, back to you. Like, you know, what's your experience with IT training? What's the good, the bad, the worst, the best? Like, where do you see it? Is there maybe a specific, company that you think is doing it right, or example from GoTo or anything?
Yeah, I think for us, we're doing it correctly because we do want to make sure that when we do the training, we first try to solve what are we trying to solve with this technology, and then like here we're trying to solve it, and then we do the technology, and then we create the training. So I do think AI training, any kind of technology training, or any other kind of training, whether it's the technology, the implementation, the tasks, it needs to be personalized for the employee and the task that you
Mhm.
want to make better. Once you do that, then you get what's in it for them. I understand. Oh, you're going to make this better. You're going to take this tedious task away from me. I don't have to do this anymore. I'm all in. All of a sudden now you've solved the problem because it works, because you understand what the problem is, and you've solved the adoption of, yeah, I believe in it. I don't have to do it anymore. Thank you very much. So employees want to embrace any kind of new technology that makes their work life, everything better, but they need to be set up for success. So you need to communicate early, often what you're doing, what the problem is, and what's in it for them. Solve their problems, not the company problems.
It's a good
Yeah,
message.
that's really great. All right. So before we jump into the Q&A, by the way, please keep those questions coming. I want to hit a couple of those where I'm seeing some trends here. But before we do that, just I would love for Paolo and Dan to kind of summarize some of the key takeaways. So Paolo, any kind of final thoughts, guidance for IT leaders as they look to further adopt AI in their organizations?
Absolutely, Neha. A couple of ones. The first one, even if you're not sure about the technology, whether you want to implement it, you have to train it. Treat it as like an employee. So it's going to need content, it's going to need knowledge that's up to date. If you don't have that, forget the technology because then whatever you put in, if it's not good, whatever it's going to spit out is not going to be good either. So you need to train it and treat it and QA it. So work on that and then figure out the technology later. Um, the second part is to mitigate the adoption of this. Some folks are going to be hesitant. We saw in the survey, some people want to use it, less people don't use it as often. Mitigate the adoption of these new technologies by implementing in your current processes and your workflows. So, in essence, build a technology to match your current human behavior instead of trying to change the human behavior to fit whatever technology you're trying to implement. Because then you have to not only solve the problem, but then you have to get people to actually use it. So, those will be my two key takeaways: content, knowledge, and make the technology match what you're currently doing today.
Love it.
Great advice.
Love that, Paolo. Yep. What about you, Dan? From your perspective, specifically key takeaways for employees?
Yeah, so instead of lingering on and thinking, oh, AI is overhyped, it's overhyped, it's overhyped, think about it's being underutilized and how to use it most effectively. Get familiar with the tools, the ones that your employers has embraced, and then the practical applications of it from a day-to-day position, like what Paulo said. It's like think about your current workflow and how it would seamlessly integrate into it. And the reality with AI is it might already be happening and you might be kind of taking it for granted in a sense because AI is just so ingrained in technology now. The
Mhm.
second thing I would say is employees feel like the training they receive from their companies is just insufficient. It's not enough. It's not guiding them to be able to use it in the right way and avoid any kind of pitfalls or things that could cause harm. Um, so beef up that training, improve it, test it, make sure that everyone has the training. It's pretty universal with the organization, like we were saying earlier, whether it's the entry level employee to someone who's more senior across different departments. This is for everyone for the most part. And then make sure that AI policy, as Paula was saying, and I learned today, is make sure it's integrated into the larger tech policy, because instead of having like a million different documents or repositories, centralizing it, I think could be really effective. And then just highlight the importance of adhering to these policies and make sure that people kind of commit to doing it right. And that is how you'll get more people to adopt, embrace, and use it effectively to then save the trillion plus in productivity.
Well said, Dan. So, I think both of you touched on policy, AI policy, and not surprisingly, there are quite a few questions that have come in from our live attendees right now that are related to AI policy. So, Paolo, I don't know if you have any guidance that's more specific as some of these folks are thinking about developing an AI policy. I know you said it should be part of your broader tech stack policy, but what would be some of the things they should think about specific to AI policy?
Yeah, so the first part is you have to understand what markets you play in and how the privacy impacts. So if you're in Europe, be careful GDPR. Brazil with privacy, in the United States. So it really has to be tailored to you and understand what that privacy is going to look like. Making sure that don't input any kind of PII, CPNI, whatever your market has to do. Keep it in terms of make it available, but don't make it static. So as the technology changes, making sure you stay up to date so that
Mhm.
if it needs to change with the latest technologies and what that looks like. And overall, IT policy, or let's call it AI policy, is not just a tech policy, it is an overall company policy. So bring in other leaders to get their input on how they can be. So it's not just you're doing it and then everybody else has to comply to it. It's how can we get feedback just like you're trying to solve the problem? Don't try to block it by restricting it, unless of course you need to, depending on the industry that you're in. But that's,
Mhm.
then you make it very restrictive, just and explain why. So the part is, remember, what's in it for your employees and why you're doing this. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I wrote down two things that you said, which I think are great takeaways on your response here. One is, AI is evolving so rapidly, that industry is evolving so rapidly. Your policy has to be dynamic, right? That was one big takeaway of what you said. The other thing I think, which is really interesting, is it's not just IT in a silo, right, that should be creating this, because AI has implications across the organization, right? Sales, marketing, legal, right? All these various teams are and should be using AI as time progresses, right? So as you're thinking about the AI policy, it should be kind of broader and more holistic for the organization. Did I capture that appropriately, Paolo?
Absolutely. And then only each person will know what's best for them.
Yep, that makes sense. That makes sense. All right, there's another question that came in. You remember we talked about usage of AI and how some folks are using free tools, others are using paid tools, whether they're company purchased or employee purchased. And what would you say are the pros and cons, right? And what is the benefit, for example, of paid tools versus others? So thoughts, Paolo, on that?
Yeah, that's a very broad question. So I'm going to try to hit on a couple of different points on that. So with the paid versus free tools, you may have access to a variety of different features and customization and also speed to response. So think like you may get an answer quicker, you may be able to generate images, or you may have a more quote unquote deep thinking in terms of being able to generate the answer back to you. The other part, and this is strikes more and more probably more apropos for what we're talking about here. With a free tool, you may run the risk of a variety of different things being used based on what you typed in, and also other information being shared, and so on with other things. Not saying that a paid tool that may not necessarily do that, but it may have some limitations as far as what they can and cannot use. So there's a lot of this listings in terms of free versus paid. You have improvement on capability and features, and you potentially may have improvement on data privacy and support based on what you're using for. So I think that's the main difference. But the third thing I also have to say, it's all about personalization. How are you going to use it? If you just want to
Mhm.
be able to ask it questions, probably free is just going to work for you. If you want to have some more advanced features, then paid may be the way to go, just because you want to be able to add some kind of context to what you're doing, and then be able to get that in a faster, quick response manner, so that you can move on to the next tasks. Like I said, it's a very broad question. I'm trying to
Yeah.
answer as best as I can because it's very specific to who you are, what you're trying to do, and what do you mean by free versus which tool is actually free versus paid.
Yeah, I think you did a nice job responding to that. And we didn't even talk about company created AI
Mhm.
tools, right? Which, for example, we use internally at GoTo, Paolo, right?
Yep.
Which then gives you a little bit more of a ring fence around the data and the information, and it doesn't go out into the broader stratosphere. So there's lots of different ways to think about that. So I realize we are almost out of time here. So thank you, Dan, thank you, Paolo. That was a great discussion. Hopefully, our attendees found that valuable. And with that, I want to hand it back to you, Danny, to close us out.
Yes, awesome. I don't know about you all, but I was fighting the urge the whole time to take down notes of all these amazing content our speakers have been dropping this whole time. So thank you guys for sharing all these great nuggets with us. But I reminded myself I don't need to take notes because you guys are getting a link to this presentation via email shortly. If you can't wait for the link and you want to get something now, don't worry. Our full report of the Pulse of Work is available to you. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to in the chat so you have that to copy as well. So the report has all of the data marks that we've been talking about for this past hour for you guys to get your copy. So thank you so much to our speakers. Dan, thank you for joining us. Paula, Neha, thank you for making the time out of your busy schedules. And more importantly, thank you to all of our audience for taking the time out of your busy schedules as well to join us here at GoTo and partake in today's webinar. We are so thankful to have you all, and we cannot wait to see you at our next one. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.